Hello and welcome. Today let us discuss about in continuation the SDG goal number 13.1. So, we all know SDG 13 talks about climate action. So, within that we have 3 indicators, and that is 13.1, 13.2 and 13.3, apart from 2 auxiliaries 13A and 13B. So, today in today's lecture let us discuss about 13.1 that which includes the following concepts. The concepts are in terms of the Sendai framework. So, what is the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction? We will also discuss about the early warning systems for heat. We will also discuss about the 4 priorities of Sendai framework and 4 pillars of early warning systems for all. So, here let us have a look at the 13 itself. So, SDG goal 13 and the first one talks about take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. So, this is what is mentioned as far as the climate action SDG goal number 13 is concerned. So, it recognizes, that means SDG 13 recognizes climate change as a global issue, inviting or requiring integrated actions to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and thereby build resilience. We need to build a kind of resilience against the climate change impacts or effects. So, have a look at the left hand side diagram or depiction, where you see in terms of the Earth's various tipping points. They stand at the brink of climate calamity, and in terms of where we are and where we need to be there. As we know, with respect to the pre-industrial scenario or pre-industrial era, which we take between 1850 to 1900, we know that the world will exceed 1.5 degree centigrade in comparison to that, in comparison to the pre-industrial era, by the year 2035, and probably will face, because of the various model predictions, it is most likely to face the warning of about 2.5 degree temperature rise by end of this 21st century. But what we need to arrest the pace of growth or the speed of this temperature rise, rate of the temperature rise. So, deep, rapid and sustained greenhouse gas emission reductions we need it by 43% by 2030. So, as far as agenda 2030 is concerned, we need to reduce the greenhouse gas emission up to 43% by end of this decade, that is 2030, and need to achieve net zero by 2050. That is the target. So, net zero means whatever we are emitting in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions to the atmosphere, we need to take it back. So, that needs to be achieved by 2050, which looks at this moment, the way we are going looks to be a little distant target. It might the 2050 might be pushed by another 1 or 1.5 decade. Let us see, the time will say. So, in terms of the monetary component, it needs our involvement of billions to trillions. You see, global climate finance flows reached an annual average of 803 billion during 2019 to 2020. So, during the by the COVID period or corona period 2019 to 2020, the investment, or you say the global climate finance flows, have gone to the extent of 803 billion US dollar. However, developing countries require nearly $6 trillion by 2030. So, to execute all these climate restoration measures or climate resilience measures, we need fund or flow of finance. So, and more so to execute all these programs and to make it climate resilient, particularly the developing countries, they need it to the tune of 6 to 8 trillions by 2030, by end of this decade. So, this itself is a huge requirement, is a tall figure, but without that meeting this target of net zero by 2050 could be a distant dream. The rate, look at the other thing in terms of the sea level rise. The rate of sea level rise has doubled in last decade. So, that means climate change is happening, temperature rise is happening, and we have started realizing the impacts in terms of sea level rise, which has been doubled in last decade. Highly vulnerable regions experience 15 times higher mortality rates from disasters. So, the regions which are highly vulnerable, they are receiving what you say mortality at a higher rate than the rest. That means the regions which are less vulnerable or none, compared to very low vulnerable regions by in terms of the data of last decade 2010 to 2020. And if we move on to the 13.1, the first indicator in terms of strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity to climate related hazards and natural disasters. So, 13.1 talks about this. We must strengthen the resilience and adaptive capacity, so that we can mitigate with respect to the climate related hazards and natural disasters. So, it emphasizes building systems to withstand climate related disasters, strengthen early warning system. So, that means we need to emphasize on building system that withstand the climate related disasters. One important point is we need to strengthen the climate the early warning system, so that people are warned or are enriched with the information in priority, so that they can take all the necessary measures, so that the loss to life and property could be minimum in terms of or from the climate or disaster point of view. Disaster risk reduction strategies, we should take all the different measures so as to reduce the disaster risk. So, whatever strategies are required, we should take all in terms of implication or apply them or make their readiness, so that the there will be reduction in disaster risks. And also we have to come out with climate adaptive infrastructure. So, the infrastructure should be such that it will be adaptive to any sort of climate change related impacts, such as all of snow, drought, heat waves, cyclones, etc. So, hazards and disaster monitoring mapping. As we know, remote sensing or the satellite remote sensing helps in giving the maps or the information in terms of maps. So, we know from MODIS is one of the sensors launched in 2000 and 2001, and Sentinel-1, 2, these all have come under the European Space Agency Copernicus program. So, they all give us very good data in terms of sometime real time information to track the weather pattern, to monitor many other activities as far as the disaster is concerned. So, in terms of mapping, various information in terms of geo information can map hazard prone mining zones and assess their resilience to extreme events. Annual average probability of global heat wave occurrence from 2011 to 2020. You can see it here in terms of the map. This is the annual average probability of global heat wave occurrence during or between 2011 to 2020, that is past decade. Have a look at the various places across the globe in terms of the terrestrial or the continental things, and we will see that there are the probability has gone maximum up to 0.86 and up to 0.86, and if we focus over our Indian subcontinent, we will see that there have been 30 to 40% in terms of the probability as far as the annual average is concerned from heat wave occurrence point of view. So, these kind of maps, these kind of what you say, spatial distribution maps coming from the satellite data actually helps us in knowing in advance or or getting the knowledge about the occurrence of several disasters, including the heat wave occurrence. Let us move on to as an example in terms of the early warning systems for heat. So, friends, we all know in terms of exposure and vulnerability, climate information at the global scale, climate information at the regional scale, description, and in terms of the broader context. So, factors affecting exposure and vulnerability include age, pre-existing health status, level of outdoor activity, socioeconomic factors including poverty and social isolation, access to use of cooling, physiological and behavioral adaptation of the population, urban heat island effects, and also the urban infrastructure. So, these all are various exposure in terms of the various exposure and vulnerability as far as different categories are concerned from the heat point of view, heat or heat wave you can say. So, climate information at the global scale. So, what are the various information we have at the global scale? So, the observed things are that very likely decrease in the number of cold days. It is observed that very likely the number of cold days will decrease, and the nights, cold days and nights, and at the cost of increase in the number of warm days and nights on the global scale between 1951 to 2010. So, it has already been observed. So, what is projected out of this observation are virtually certain that in most places there will be more hot and fewer cold temperature extremes as global mean temperature increase. For example, events defined as extremes on both daily and seasonal time scales. Similarly, with respect to the regional cases, we can have likely that heat wave frequency has increased since 1950 in large parts of Europe and Asia and also Australia. So, projection is it is most likely that by end of 21st century under RCP 8.5 representative concentration pathway, all of us know, we have discussed this in week 3, that most of the lands or land regions in a current 20-year high temperature will happen. So, these all actually once we know in terms of what is the past trend which comes from the observation, various observation sources including the satellite based, we can project some trend. So, these projections actually serves as a kind of early warning system because we know in advance where, what and how much will happen. So, this helps. So, this kind of early warning systems as far as heat as an example is concerned helps in terms of minimizing or reducing the disaster risk. Coming to the same in continuation indicator 13.1. 13.1.1 talks about number of deaths, missing people and directly affected people attributed to disasters per 1 lakh population. Number 2 talks about countries that adopt and implement national disaster risk reduction strategies in line with Sendai framework. So, at Sendai there was a kind of framework has formed and after lot of deliberations, and this in the line of Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction during 2015 to 2030. So, that was very important event as far as the as far as strengthening the resilience and adaptive capacity to climate related disaster is concerned. So, Sendai framework is well known for that. Coming to the third point under this 13.1.3, it says that proportion of local governments that adopt and implement local disaster risk reduction strategies in line with national disaster risk reduction strategies. So, indicator 13.1.2 serve as bridge between the sustainable development goals and the Sendai framework as far as DRR or disaster risk reduction is concerned. So, by April 2020, 118 countries and territories adopted the national disaster risk reduction strategy. It is a huge success because by end of April 2020, 118 countries have followed this framework, which was given by Sendai framework in terms of national level adoption of disaster risk reduction strategies. This four depiction talks about the number of deaths, missing persons, and directly affected persons they are attributed to disasters per 1 lakh persons. So, per 1 lakh person how much are affected. So, if you see in terms of affected, homeless, injured, and on the upper left you just see the death and missing persons at the rate for the year 2024. So, lot of deaths and missing persons are there in US, and also the northwest portion of Canada, and also next to that if you see it is there for Australia, and so there are a lot of deaths and missing person which are because of or due to the climate related things, and India stands somewhere between what you say 1 to 3 or 3 to 10 in terms of per lakh persons. So, this itself talks about the situation, alarming situation as far as loss or affecting a loss of life or the life affected in terms of homeless, injured, and affected people. Let us move on to the adaptation and implication of policies with respect to 2024. Number of countries that adopt and implement national disaster risk reduction, or we say the DRR strategies in line with the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction 2015 to 2030. You can see here all 118 countries are mentioned there. So, this scale is 0 to 1, higher score for more policies. It's based on average score from 10 sub indicators that collectively reflect progress towards implementation of the Sendai framework. Information capture in terms of disaster risk reduction score, and you can very well see that most of the countries they have already incorporated into this DRR into their national framework or strategies, but many more are yet to take it into their national level DRR strategy. Coming to the next one in terms of the proportion of local governments. Proportion local governments that adopt and implement local disaster risk reduction strategies in line with national DRR strategy. You can see there is over India it is completely full, more than 90%. So, and many of these countries at their local government level they have adopted to implement the disaster risk reduction strategies at local level. So, this itself is huge success. Share of local government with disaster risk reduction strategies up to vary up to 90%, and where there is blank, that means there is no data to be compiled. But you see many more places they are yet to come out with incorporation of this at their local government level. Now, let us move on the 7 targets, the 7 global targets as far as Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction is concerned. The first one is reduce the disaster deaths by 2030. So, as much as possible the target is to reduce the disaster death by end of this decade. Second is reduction in the number of people affected by disasters. So, second is definitely we need to reduce the number of people affected. Third is the loss in terms of economy or material or property. Fourth, we need to reduce the damage to critical infrastructure and services. So, fourth is after ensuring all these things, there should be reduction to damage in terms of critical infrastructure and services. So, that should not be hampered because of the disasters or climate induced disasters. So, our critical infrastructure such as road, rail, all these things should not be disturbed, and the services also including medical and other services. The fifth is increase increase countries with disaster risk reduction strategies. So, the now we have seen 118 countries have already signed and have started implementing, but we need to continue the effort so as to bring all the countries say 194 under United Nations to bring under this umbrella, so that they will adapt to agree to this disaster risk reduction strategies as discussed as framed and in terms of the Sendai framework. Sixth, strengthen the international cooperation and support. So, there needs to be support in terms of cooperation, knowledge sharing, and pre and post kind of mitigation, adaptation, and all these things. So, international cooperation and support is very essential. The seventh and the last one is improve access to early warning systems and risk information. So, we all as the signatory nations are 118, or you can say we have the target to reach to all 194 or 197. We all should have access to early warning systems and risk information. So, this is what is the 7 global targets as far as the Sendai framework for DRR is concerned. Now, I am sorry. So, the next is with respect to Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. So, we have 4 priorities. Priority 1 is understanding disaster risk. So, that is to collect and analyze disaster loss, exposure and vulnerability data. Second is with respect to developing risk maps and multi-hazard assessment maps, as we discussed using remote sensing or geospatial tools. Third is we need to share in terms of open access disaster information for decision making. So, information in terms of decision which are required for decision making should be available in open access or open source format. We must strengthen the research science policy interface and technology use. So, whatever required in terms of R&D, research and development, to come out with more and more science and policy interface and technology use should be promoted. So, also we need to promote education, awareness and indigenous knowledge that needs to be integrated, so that the understanding of disaster risk will be clear to all the stakeholders. Priority 2, strengthening the disaster risk governance. Integrate disaster risk reduction into national and local laws, policies and development plans. Define clear institutional roles and coordination mechanisms. Establish national and local DRR strategy, the disaster risk reduction strategies, with targets and indicators. And we must ensure that the participation of various stakeholders. The stakeholders are the communities who are the sufferers, the private players who are there, who have a lot of a role to promote and in terms of strengthening this disaster risk governance, and also the NGO, non-government organization sectors. And finally, the monitoring and public reporting in terms of what are the progress are being achieved, that has to be done at a regular manner or at a regular pace. Priority 3. In terms of this, the priority 3 is investigating in disaster risk reduction for resilience. We need to investigate. So what are the DRR required for resilience building? So, first is allocate financial resources for prevention and mitigation measures. So, we need to allocate money, because everything will run with some funding support. So, that needs to be, this allocation in terms of financial resources is must. Second is strengthen resilient infrastructure in terms of schools, hospitals and utilities. So, whatever the resilient infrastructure, they need to be strengthened. Promote risk insurance and financial protection mechanisms. So, in terms of the what are the mechanisms as far as the risk the insurance in terms of protecting this. So, we need to promote the risk the what you say insurance mechanisms. So, if that is there, then then we need that we are safe in terms of dealing with any climate or disaster related what do you say risk. So, integrate the disaster risk reduction into other things such as land use planning. So, if you see that these are the places where disaster risk is more in terms of vulnerability, then we should avoid our habitation or many other crucial or vital infrastructure to be installed or to be there. So, we need to avoid. So, what we need to do that we need to integrate DRR into a lot of planning including the land use planning. Then protect the livelihood, business and supply chains. So, after doing this we need to protect our various livelihood sources and all other activities or businesses including the supply chains. So, they need to be safe, they need to be safeguarded from various disaster risks. Coming to the priority, enhancing preparedness and build back better. So, we need to develop early warning and emergency communication systems. We need to conduct regular drills, training and contingency planning. So, this actually gives us a kind of readiness or a preparedness as far as this disaster is concerned. It ensures continuity of essential services during disasters and also helps in strengthening response capacity and community based preparedness. Apply build back better principles during recovery and reconstruction. So, coming towards end in terms of early warning for all, the 4 pillars. The 4 pillars are disaster risk knowledge and management led by UNDRR, that is United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. So, detection, observation, monitoring, analysis and forecasting, which is led by WMO, World Meteorological Organization. Warning, dissemination and communication led by ITU, and also preparedness for response capability led by IFRC. Looking at the first one in terms of the UNDRR, the countries have data and tools to generate early warning products. Coming to the WMO, countries access global and regional forecasting products from GPCs, RSMCs and NMHS. So, from different sources we need to access the projections as far as the climate disaster is concerned, that is by WMO. Coming to the ITU, national ITC regulators promote the use of CAP for national telecommunication companies. So, they are also a very important pillars as far as the early warning for all is concerned. And the IFRC, preparedness and anticipation action plans, are operational and linked to predictive and warning services. So, at the center if you see the disaster risk knowledge coming mostly from the UNDRR, the observation, monitoring, analysis and forecasting coming from the WMO. The ITU gives us the warning, dissemination and communication, and IFRC gives the preparedness and response capabilities. So, if we integrate all these things, that will be a people centered multi hazard early warning system called MHEWS. So, we integrate all the knowledge, projections, the systems that disseminate in terms of telecommunication and companies, and also the preparedness in terms of response and capabilities. So, all this together build an early warning system for all. So, these make the 4 pillars of early warning for all. So, we have taken help of these citations or these references, and if you are interested to know more about that, we encourage you to go through these. So, to conclude, SDG 13 focuses on strengthening the resilience and adaptive capacity to climate related hazards, and geoinformation tools, satellite remote sensing, geospatial tools include GIS, remote sensing, your sensor technologies and many other tools that helps in terms of supporting the hazard monitoring, risk mapping and disaster planning. Planning in terms of mitigation. Indicators track disaster impacts, national strategies and local adoption aligned with Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. 4 pillars led by UNDRR, WMO, ITU and IFRC coordinate warnings and preparedness. Just we discussed that all 4. One gives the UNDRR gives the information, WMO gives the weather related projection information, ITU gives the communication and telecommunication network and IFRC gives the capabilities. So, these all in a coordinated way gives us a kind of warning or early warning system and preparedness. Finally, the policies, investments and preparedness actions reduce losses while improving recovery and climate resilience. So, to summarize, we discussed about 13.1 and the Sendai framework. We discussed about the loss of life, the life getting affected, property getting affected. So, they all need to be taken care, including the infrastructure and the important services. So, for that we need to be ready with respect to the kind of early warning system which needs to be done in a coordinated way and at a global scale. All these 4 pillars, particularly UNDRR, WMO, ITU and IFRC, they do a good business, they do a well coordinated or integrated business in terms of coming out with a kind of warning and preparedness. Thank you very much.